Hi, and welcome to Unmistakably You. I'm so glad that you're here with me today talking about better big day budgets. I've worked with hundreds of couples through my wedding planning career, and hands down, the biggest stressor that I always hear people complaining about is their budget. So I'm here today to give you some true, actionable, real strategies to get your budget under control and to truly master that budget. I'm Amy. I actually started life as a musician. I have a master's degree in trombone performance, which, yes, is the least useful degree you can possibly have, just in case you're wondering. But I do have training in education, in music education specifically. And then I got married, and I really liked the process. I always kind of joke that I like to make lists and boss people around. So it was a natural step from there to getting into wedding planning. For over 10 years, I've been working with wonderful, lovely, thoughtful, kind, and beautiful human beings to plan somewhere around 40 to 50 weddings per year. I have an amazing team. We work with phenomenal couples, and I get so much joy in being able to help couples plan their big day and to navigate all of the stresses and to help them to still get to the end of the day happy with a smile on their face and still in love. I however, recognize that I can't help everyone one on one. And that's why in 2019, I launched the Wedding Academy. The Wedding Academy is a series of online courses where I walk you through everything from absolute start to finish. If you're looking for complete hand-holding guidance to plan your own wedding, I teach you how to do it step by step through videos and digital downloads. I also have my own workbook up there. It is the most comprehensive wedding planning workbook you'll ever find anywhere. It's 162 pages of goodness, and it walks you through all of the questions to ask your vendors, all of the things to think about, and it gives you a really concise place to write down all of the notes that you take while you meet with those vendors. So, through in person coordination and education, I am so blessed to be immersed in this wedding industry. Now, today we're talking about budgets because I know that that is probably something that's weighing heavy on your mind. I am going to give you 4 steps to take to navigate setting up your budget. Now, if you're halfway through the planning, you can jump in at any point. You may need to revise or revamp some things, but my goal is that there's something helpful here for everyone. If you're just starting out, I always suggest that you start with a discussion with your partner about your priorities. Then we're going to move into talking about determining what's realistic in terms of a number. How many dollars are you going to spend? How then are you going to allocate those funds? And I also really advise you to work with a really comprehensive spreadsheet from the very beginning of your planning. So we'll talk through all of that as we go. First, though, why is budgeting important? Well, so that you don't end up looking like this poor bride, for one thing, but also because you're a grown up. You know that we all should be responsible with our money. But particularly when we're potentially talking about a very substantial amount of money, allocating it correctly and managing it appropriately is going to really take a huge weight off your shoulders. It's going to help you avoid uncertainty. It's going to help you start that marriage on the right foot and not be mired in a pile of debt that you've amassed by exceeding your budget dramatically. And it's going to help you just stay sane. It's so much more calming to be able to look at things organized and laid out in a spreadsheet than it is to wonder, how much did I spend on that photographer again? When's that final catering payment due? What am I forgetting? So my goal today is to help you navigate all of that so that you don't forget anything, you know how much you're going to spend, and you know where you're going to put that money. Now, I do see couples making some pretty common mistakes, and I'd love to help you avoid them right from the get-go. I can't tell you how many times I have a couple come in and sit down on the couch in my showroom, and they say to me, we booked the first venue we saw. We totally fell in love with it. It's absolutely everything we ever wanted. And now we've gotten into booking the rest of our vendors, and we realize that all of a sudden we're spending so much more money than we thought we were going to. And I see this all the time. When you commit to things before you've set a budget, you're essentially just working backwards and hoping for the best. And that's very rarely a strategy that's going to be successful. I would advise you to set a budget, a comfortable, concrete number first, and then book venues and vendors that fit within that budget rather than that sort of knee jerk, immediate reaction of, oh, I love it, let's get it. You need to make sure that you put down deposits on venues and vendors that are actually going to be workable with your budget in the long run. The second thing I've already kind of indicated is the importance of setting priorities. Unfortunately, you can't have the Cadillac in every category unless you have an unlimited budget. And I always kind of liken this to buying a house. There are a lot of parallels there. I often compare myself as a wedding planner to your realtor. You've never bought a house before, you're going to hire a realtor to show you the ropes, to find the properties for you that are going to tick all the boxes. As a wedding planner, for someone who's never planned a wedding before, I'm going to show you the ropes. I'm going to show you the venues and the vendors that tick all the boxes. There are a lot of similarities, but in terms of priorities, it's a lot like creating that list of must-haves when you buy a house. The third thing that I see couples doing is forgetting miscellaneous details. And of course, you don't know what you don't know. So it's so important to start your planning and start your budget with a comprehensive spreadsheet that has everything on it, including taxes and gratuities and fees for things like licenses and permits that you might not think about. So starting with all of the information instead of coming back to it the week before the wedding and saying, oh my gosh, all of a sudden I have $5,000 in extra things that I wasn't budgeting for, and upping your stress, starting with a great comprehensive budget is so important. That's a big number. I'll give you a second to absorb that. That is the price of the average wedding in 2018 in Canada. Now, obviously, averages mean in the middle. You've got weddings that are far more expensive than that and weddings that are far more affordable than that. But I want you to have a sense of what the average is here in Canada. It varies from country to country, obviously. This is the average, and that's not to say that you have to spend this much or that you have to limit yourself to this little, depending on whether you think that's a big number or not. It's an average, so you can certainly splash out and spend a lot more. You can certainly pare down and spend a lot less. Jumping right into your first strategy here, the first thing that is so vital is that you and your partner sit down and discuss what is important to you. Again, this is like buying a house. If you were investigating real estate for the first time, you would make a list of what you need to have. An ensuite bathroom, 3 bedrooms, a big backyard, a finished basement. Then you bring in your realtor and you give that list to the realtor, and they find properties that hopefully match as many of those things as possible. But if you've ever bought a house, you know that nothing realistically is ever perfect, and something usually has to give. Maybe there's no ensuite, but maybe you could put one in the future, but it does have a big backyard and 3 bedrooms and a finished basement. So that's ultimately what you go for, with the little compromise that you don't get your ensuite. Wedding planning is very much like that. You need to have a conversation with your partner. You can do it face to face. You can write out your own individual priorities and then compare, but you need to determine what's important to you in terms of the structure of the day. Do you want a traditional structure? Do you want a cocktail style? Do you want to go completely non-traditional and do a board games night or a curling bonspiel? I'm from Canada. You need to think about the style of venue. Do you want to have a beautiful ballroom with crystal chandeliers, or do you want to have it in a barn? Which vendors are the most important to you? Do you have to have great photos and you're going to splash out on the best photographer you can afford? Or is it not so important to you? How many guests do you want to have? And here, you always need to be careful that you're also talking to anybody else who is invested in the wedding. And usually what this means is parents. Parents sometimes have their own guest lists of their own friends that you might not be anticipating. So make sure that you double check that with your parents before you commit to a venue, for instance, that can only hold 100 guests. And then you find out that your parents are going to add another 30 to that. The second strategy that I would have you implement is, once you've determined your priorities, you need to discuss an actual number an amount of money that is realistic for you. And I always call this the I can get married for $5,000, right? Discussion. I had that discussion with my husband before we got married. As I said, I wasn't a planner then. And let me tell you, we did not get married for $5,000. It was close, and it's possible. It's absolutely possible. But I would say that it's more difficult in a lot of ways to plan a $5,000 wedding than it is to plan a $50,000 wedding. The important thing is that you figure out what's realistic for you, not what's realistic for your best friend or your sister who got married 5 years ago, what's realistic for you. And there are basically 3 ways I would suggest that you can do that. The first is to take your guest count and estimate based on the costs for food and drink at your venue. Now, this is going to require a little bit of research, which, of course, wedding planning is all about research. But if you know you want to have a hotel wedding, reach out to a hotel in your area that you like, ask them for their packages. And then if you say, okay, their 3-course plated meal with the 4-hour open bar is $120 per person, you're going to take your guest count, you're going to multiply by $120 per person, and then you're going to multiply that by 0.35 or somewhere between 0.35 and 0.5. The reason for that is because your reception costs tend to make up 35 to 50% of your budget. So, of course, that's going to vary based on the style of reception that you're having, the venue that you're having it at, and the kind of catering you're having. But generally speaking, 35 to 50% of your budget is what you want to allocate to feed and give drinks to people. So you can start that way, and that'll give you a general idea of where your overall budget will fall. Perhaps a safer option is to consider where you're comfortable contributing. How much money do you have saved up? How much money could you save between now and the wedding? How much money are your parents contributing? And that's a tough one. It probably means you're going to have to sit down with your parents and have that uncomfortable, hey, mom and dad conversation. How much are you contributing? It's uncomfortable, absolutely, but it's a conversation that I would really advise that you have early in the planning process. If you're depending on your parents for 10 grand and they only come through with 2 grand, that's a substantial shortfall that you're going to have to make up. So find out what other people are contributing prior to setting that budget. Maybe you've got a rich Aunt Betty who has always wanted you to have the wedding of your dreams. That's awesome. I hope you have a rich Aunt Betty. Ask her how much she's contributing so that you know what numbers you're working with. The final method is, of course, also going to require a little bit more research as well, but it's really worth it to reach out to people in your area. I can give you average costs for London all day, every day, but if you're in a different area, it behooves you to find out what your local costs look like. And there are essentially 3 ways you can do that. You can reach out to a friend or a family member who's had a wedding in your area recently, a wedding that's close in style and in scope to yours. That's going to give you a sense of what they spent and therefore what might be realistic for you. You can also reach out to swap and sell groups on Facebook. You probably know the ones, every region has them. So go to your local swap and sell and ask some questions of, it's often brides, but I'm going to say the couples that are on those sites. And then the third way is to pick one of your priorities. So let's say photography is a priority. Find a photographer locally that you're attracted to their style. You really like their work. Go online and look at their portfolio. And then reach out to them and say, hey, I'm just wondering, I'm interested in your work. Could you send me a list of your packages? And they're going to do that. And that's going to give you a sense of what your priority is going to cost. Usually for photography, I allocate somewhere between 8 and 10% of the budget. Of course, if it's super important to you, you can expand that, but then multiply the number that they give you for their package by 8 to 10 to 12% of your budget, and that's going to expand the budget into something that's going to be realistic based on your priorities. It's a lot of math involved. Welcome to Budget World. Now, it's really important that you consider what's realistic for you. This is your wedding. This is not your sister's wedding. So if your sister said to you, I spent $85,000, and your immediate reaction is, then don't set $85,000 as your budget. You need to consider what's realistic and comfortable for you and your fiance. And that's going to take into consideration a lot of factors. Parent versus personal contribution to the budget, for instance. How long are you going to be engaged? Perhaps you can save more over a longer engagement. Do you have existing savings that you can throw at the wedding? How much more can you realistically save if you cancel your cable and you cut back on your takeout food and you limit yourself to one Starbucks a week instead of one Starbucks a day? How much can you realistically save between now and your wedding? Do you have other financial commitments on the horizon? Are you looking at buying a house? Are you looking at starting a family? Are you looking at adopting a puppy? All of those things come with a price tag, and you need to figure out how that's going to affect your wedding budget before you allocate a certain amount to your wedding and then find out that, oh no, we can't do that because we're buying a house. Think about the size of your guest list. The more people, the more expensive. The quickest way to cut down your budget, not the easiest, but the quickest way, is to decrease that guest count. What's the desired structure of the day? Are you having a huge blowout with a 7-course Italian meal and an open bar for 8 hours with a 10-piece local band? Or are you having a scaled down Sunday brunch with no dance? Think about the desired theme or aesthetic of your day. Do you want everything to sparkle? Do you need to have crystal? Do you need to have gold flatware? Do you need to have every inch of your venue draped? Or are you hoping to have a more laid back, quiet, sort of barn style or private property wedding? Think about how the day is going to look, and that's going to also play a big role in your wedding. The third thing you're going to need to do once you've decided on what your total number is take that number and divide it up. Now, the bar graph that you're looking at here is very, very generic. My disclaimer is that a budget is organic, it is a living, breathing entity, and you need to be able to massage that budget to effectively represent your priorities. So you may put a huge priority on having a 10-piece live band, in which case you're going to need to allocate more in your entertainment budget. You might think that food and drink are the most important thing ever, and your reception budget is going to cost more than 50% overall. So know that this needs to be tweaked and massaged, but this is a general idea of where your money will go. The lion's share will go to reception, and then you work your way down through ceremony, photo and video, transportation, down through decor and flowers, and ending with entertainment or music in my case. We'll talk through each of these categories now. Now, you can read. I'm not going to read all of this to you, but typically I like to allocate between 35 and 50% to the reception budget. And that's going to encompass everything from the reception site fee, if there's a hall fee, through your catering, your food, all of your food, from hors d'oeuvres to meal to late night, all of your alcohol, all of your staffing charges. If you're doing favors, if you're bringing in entertainment, and here I'm not talking about DJs or bands, here I'm talking about things like a magician or a belly dancer or a caricature artist, something like that. There are little elements of decor. I've got decor in a separate category, but things like your guest book or a memorial display that are going to be specific to your reception, and then miscellaneous charges that your venue might leverage, or childcare if you are inclined to provide that for your guests. In terms of your ceremony, I usually allocate about 5%, and that's going to cover your site fee, any chairs or chair moving or chair rental fees that you have, your officiant, and any other associated decor costs. Your attire could vary differently based on yourself and your partner. If you are two brides, both of whom are wearing a big white wedding dress, you're probably going to need more than 9% of your budget. If you're two grooms, both of whom are wearing suits that you already own, you can decrease that a lot. As always, priorities will dictate percentages. But you do need to allocate here for things like alterations to both suits, tuxes, and dresses, any undergarments, any accessories, shoes, jewelry, bolero, as well as hair and makeup services and spa services. So don't forget to put those in your budget as well. When we're talking about rings, we're not just talking about the purchase of rings, we're talking about extra things like engraving and insurance as well. Always make sure that you ask your home insurance provider whether your rings are covered under your contents or whether you need an additional rider on your policy. Very important. Photo and video are often a high priority with couples, and you're going to want to include all the things here. So, is there an engagement session included or is it extra? Think about how many hours and the package that you're going to book. Are you going to require any additional products like extra copies of your video or perhaps albums from your photographer? Excuse me. Is there a travel fee? Are you hiring a photo booth? I've also got gratuity in here. You might want to consider whether or not you're going to include a gratuity for your vendors, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. In terms of transportation, you're often providing transportation for the wedding party, sometimes for the family and your guests as well. In terms of a wedding planner, here's my disclaimer. Wedding planning is, in my opinion, a very important service, whether it's full service planning or day of coordination. You may need to beef up the 2% if you're looking for full service planning, but for my money, that's a solid investment because a good wedding planner will absolutely save you money in other categories that you can then infuse into this category to beef up that 2%. Wedding planners will save you money, but also, and perhaps even more importantly, they save you time and energy and anxiety and stress. Off my soapbox now. In terms of miscellaneous expenses, we're looking at things like parties, gifts, licenses and permits, marriage courses, prep courses. Those are things that often people forget to include, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about those later. But don't forget, your miscellaneous category has 9% in there because it's a lot of things that oftentimes people neglect, and then they get closer to the wedding and they realize, oh my gosh, I've just added this huge amount of money for things I didn't plan for. So again, comprehensive spreadsheet right from the get-go. Here are usually your pretty things, flowers and decor. In terms of flowers, we're talking personal flowers, so that's anything you carry or wear, ceremony and reception flowers, table centers and that kind of thing. Decor can encompass anything at your ceremony or your reception or miscellaneous decor, things like card boxes and that sort of thing. Rentals. A word quickly about rentals. If you are having a private property wedding where you are essentially creating a venue in your home, in your backyard, on your farm, you're going to need to take a lot more than 3% to allocate towards rentals, because the rentals of things like that, when you're bringing in a tent, particularly, but renting all of the tables and chairs and washroom trailers and flatware, china, glassware, generators, everything like that for all of your guests, that can very quickly add up to $50 or $60 or $70 per person. So very quickly, you may find that you are at the equivalent of a venue fee for creating a venue in your backyard. So the misconception that tent weddings or private property weddings are more affordable is a complete myth in most cases. So just be cautious of that. If you are creating your own venue, you're going to need far more than 3% in your budget. Stationery and bakery. Now, stationery refers to everything that happens before the day as well as everything that happens on the day. So your save the dates, your invitations would be your preliminary pieces. And then on the day, usually your stationery is what directs your guests. Things like ceremony programs, signage, table numbers, that sort of thing. Now, bakery is a category that I often actually these days see being completely left out, particularly if your venue provides dessert or your caterer provides dessert with your meal. The tradition of cutting the cake is a tradition that is perhaps starting to diminish in popularity a little bit. Certainly, there are lots of people who still do it, but if it's not important to you, I would advise you that this is a place where you could save some money, because realistically, if your venue is serving dessert, nobody's going to eat your cake, or very few people are going to eat your cake. I would say usually about 20% of guests will choose to eat cake if it's offered at a late night buffet, for instance. So that may be somewhere where you can save a little bit of money. And just a final point about that, something that's actually kind of interesting, is that if you're here in Ontario, cakes are not taxable. So they're the only part of your wedding that is not subject to the HST. Finally, music is perhaps one of the more important elements of your wedding, but it's a category that has a smaller budget allocated with it. 4% is going to be hopefully sufficient to get you a great DJ or a band. You're thinking not only about your dance, if you're having a dance, but also music for ceremony, cocktails, and dinner. Now, if you're struggling with this and finding that you can't afford a DJ for the whole day, you can certainly save some money by creating a playlist for your ceremony, your dinner, and your dance. Your ceremony, your cocktails, and your dinner. But I would advise you that if you can at all make it work, having a professional musician, professional DJ for your dance is going to absolutely impact the energy on the dance floor. It's going to be potentially the difference between a completely empty dance floor all night if your guests aren't enjoying whatever playlist happens to be plugged in, and a really energetic pump and dance party. So if you can, I always advise a professional DJ or a band for your dance. Now, as I've mentioned, having a comprehensive spreadsheet right from the beginning of your planning is so important to make sure that you don't miss anything. Now, I do have my template, which I'm more than happy to share with you. If you want to reach out to me, I can share either a Google Sheet or an Excel doc with you. You're welcome to create your own. You can go back in the video and make sure that you've gone through every category and included everything that I've mentioned. But write it down and allocate money to it right from the beginning. These are the things that people often forget. Taxes. In Ontario, that's 13%. That's a lot of money. Don't forget to allocate for that. Gratuities. Now, gratuities in my mind are something that should be earned, not expected. But the disclaimer there, and this will change based on your region. So find out what the convention is in your region. But here in Ontario, the convention is that there are basically three sectors of the industry that expect a tip, and the rest is at your discretion. Those three sectors are catering, so either your venue or your caterer. Typically, they will build somewhere between a 15 to 18% gratuity right into your bill, and that's non-negotiable. That's just part of their bill. The second is limousines or transportation companies, and the reason that they usually quote their prices plus tax and tip is because they're often paying their drivers less than minimum wage, and if that driver is going to make any money on the day, they need to have a gratuity. And the third sector of the industry is your hair and makeup artist. And this is pretty comparable to going into a salon to have your hair done. Typically, you would tip about 15%. And usually on the day of the wedding, your hair and makeup artists are going to expect that as well. Now, in some cases, that will be written into your invoice. In some cases, it won't. Everything else, photography, videography, officiant, wedding planner, florist, baker, decorator, that's all in most cases left to your discretion. And I would again advise that it should be earned, not expected. If you feel that it's appropriate to give a monetary gratuity for a job very well done that exceeded your expectations, by all means, any vendor will greatly appreciate that. I just want to mention here, though, that many wedding vendors are small businesses, and word of mouth in small businesses is so, so key. So if you feel that a vendor did a great job for you, shout it from the rooftops. Do a Google review, do a Facebook review, recommend that vendor to everyone you know who's getting married. It will be so appreciated in the long run by that vendor. A really thoughtful thank you card also goes a long way. Maybe you want to throw a Starbucks gift card inside there, or maybe you want to accompany it with a bottle of wine. Regardless, the vendor is going to appreciate it and not expect a gratuity, but be very thankful if you choose to show your appreciation with one. Just make sure that you account for it in your budget from the beginning. Travel or overtime fees are something that are often overlooked. This often comes into play with a photographer or a videographer. If your reception happens to be running late, you need to know if your photographer needs to leave at 8 o'clock and you haven't done your first dance yet, are they going to charge you an additional fee for that extra hour? You might want to proactively account for that instead of reactively having to pay that after the wedding date. Alterations, as I mentioned before, often get left out of the budget. Usually, I account for about $500 for wedding dress alterations. Obviously, it depends on what that dress needs, but usually it's not a simple hem or an easy add a button, take out a zipper, that kind of thing. So it can be quite expensive. Licenses, permits, and insurance. If you are providing your own alcohol, you will need to have a liquor license. I would also advise that you have additional insurance. And in fact, some venues will require that you have additional insurance. So make sure that you inquire with your venue as to what their requirements are there. Permits. You may have to purchase a permit if you're getting married in a park, for instance. So don't forget to include those in your budget right from the beginning. Music fees here in Ontario, we call them SOCAN and Resound. These are the producer and artist fees. They go back to the people who make the music. If you're having recorded music played, typically this is a fee that you should pay. It will most likely be included in your venue fee, but sometimes it's not. So double check about that as well. Marriage prep courses, not always required. If you're getting married in a church, often they are, but typically they're not required for a secular wedding. It's something I would recommend, though. If you have it in your means to do so, they can be very, very valuable. Gifts, as I mentioned before, it's traditional to give gifts to your wedding party. It's just a small token to say, you know what, thank you for being here with me today and being my rock and planning my bridal shower and running the games at my stag and doe and being there to, help me at the rehearsal dinner. It's just a small token of appreciation, but it is pretty common to do that. You might want to also consider gifts for your parents or gifts from yourself to your partner. Now, as a parent, I would be more than happy if my daughter were to just write me a beautiful letter on her wedding day, and I will be a blubbering mess. But you don't have to spend a lot of money, just a little token to sort of remember the day. You'll want to account for parties as well, whether that's an engagement party or a rehearsal dinner, maybe a bridesmaid's meet and greet, that kind of thing. And hotel rooms are one that are also often overlooked. If you are providing accommodation for yourselves or your wedding party the night before or the night of the wedding, make sure you include that in the budget as well. Now, it wouldn't be a budget workshop without some money saving tips. Now, none of these are rocket science and none of them are easy, unfortunately. Um, I wish I could just wave a magic wand and give you all of the answers to how to save a ton of money. It is difficult and it requires knowing your priorities and making some compromises. The first way is to pare down, and it's difficult, absolutely, to pare down a guest list. Sometimes you have to draw some hard lines in the sand. We're not inviting plus ones of anyone who's been together less than 6 months. We're not inviting children. We're not inviting second cousins. Difficult decisions that might have some blowback, but it's the fastest way to decrease your budget is to decrease your guest list. You can also scale back on your vision. If you want that beautiful, shiny, glittery, over the top wedding, you can still have that, but pare it down a little bit. You can still have a very, very elegant wedding without having to have all of the decor. So keep your eye on the prize and think about what's really important to you. It does take some research in order to save money. I would suggest, kind of like you're hiring a contractor to do work on your house, meeting vendors in various price ranges. It will stand you in good stead if you can compare a more affordable photographer with a more elaborate photographer with someone in the middle and find out who you have a really good rapport with. And that will also, in conjunction with your priorities, help you to make a decision on who's the best fit for you. If you really love a vendor and it doesn't look like you can afford them, don't be shy about sharing your budget. Let them know, you know what, I love your photography style. I really want to work with you, but I can't afford your 10-hour package. Is there anything you can do for me? And you would be amazed at how creative vendors can be about making it work within your budget that you're comfortable with. A photographer can say, well, you can't afford 10 hours, but what if we tweak your itinerary, we do this and move this here, and then we have a 6-hour package. And that will work just fine if you're willing to make that tweak to your itinerary. I would also advise you to take advantage of wedding shows and seasonal sales. Here in London, we tend to have wedding shows in January and in September. If you can make it work with your planning process to book vendors in conjunction with those shows, often they'll offer a promotional price or a discount or some kind of an incentive to book with them. It's a good opportunity to walk around and meet people face to face and see who meshes with your aesthetic and your personality. And then if they match your budget, it's an extra bonus if they're giving a discount as well. In terms of seasonal sales, this can apply especially to jewelry. If you're buying rings, shop around engagement seasons like Valentine's Day, Christmas, and New Year's. Often there are Black Friday sales. That can really save you some money. Now, on the other side of that, try to avoid planning your wedding around Valentine's Day or Mother's Day if flowers are important to you, because the price of flowers doubles around those flower-heavy holidays. So just be aware of that. I'd advise you also to be smart and to do it yourself within reason. So be careful with what you commit to DIY. First, be smart about the vendors you hire. Some vendors will provide two services, and what that does is it saves you what I call the get me through the door fee. Every vendor is going to have some kind of a minimum, whether it's stated or not. They have a kind of baseline price that's going to make them get out of bed and put their pants on. They're going to require a certain amount of money before they will come and provide services at your wedding. So if you're asking a decorator for just one tiny little cake table element, they're going to charge you a premium for it because it's not worth their while just to go out there and do that one thing. So look for vendors that provide more than one service. Maybe you can find a photographer who also does videography within their company. You can save some money there if they package them together. Maybe you can find a florist who also does decor, or like myself, a wedding coordinator who also does decor. Because we're already there for you, we can bring the decor, we're leaving the house anyway, and we can give you a far better price than bringing in a separate decorator. With regard to DIY, I caution you to be careful what you commit to. The week before your wedding is going to be crazy. You are going to have a million things to do. No matter how organized you are, you're going to feel like you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off. And is that really the time when you want to be baking your cake, or you want to be receiving a floral shipment from Costco and processing and feeding and prepping all the flowers and then trying to put together a bouquet, but you don't really know what you're doing? So be very cautious about what you commit to. If you're totally comfortable working with flowers, maybe that's a great thing that you and your bridesmaids can work on, but don't overcommit to other elements of DIY because it will stress you out and it will make you a little ball of anxiety that is unable to enjoy your own wedding day. So please make sure that you're very cautious about what you commit to with regard to DIY. You made it! That's the end of the 4 tips. Those are 4 things that you can do right now to make sure that you set up your budget for success and that you maintain that budget throughout your wedding planning process. Now, I recognize that budget is not the only stressor when it comes to wedding planning, and I work with a ton of clients to help reduce their stress in any area. If you're local to London or if you're in the Southern Ontario region, I would love it if you would connect. I am happy to sit down and chat with you in my showroom or over a virtual video call about anything that you're worried about. We do everything from full service wedding planning to day of coordination and everything in between. I could sit down with you and just do a budget consult. I could coach you through how to pull together a decor vision. Whatever the service is that is going to give you the peace of mind to know that you're on the right planning track, I'm happy to provide that. Alternatively, I provide, as I mentioned, education programs online for the DIY goddess who wants to do it herself, but she just isn't quite there yet. You don't know what you don't know. So my courses walk you through step by step every single element that you're going to need to want to do throughout the whole planning process. So you can check out our in-person services or our online services through our website, www.unmistakably.you.com. Please feel free to drop me a line. I would love to hear what you thought was helpful, what you didn't know, any questions that I didn't answer in this workshop. I'm more than happy to chat with you about. You can reach out to me in person. My email address and my phone number are at the bottom of the screen here. Human contact is, I think, often kind of neglected this day and age. So I'm more than happy to chat with you by email or on the phone, or we can set up a video conference. You can also reach out via our Facebook group. We have a very active group called Wedding Planning Simplified. Look us up on Facebook, join the group. There are helpful hints and tips in there every day. I'm always in there answering questions and communicating with the members. I do a live every week answering questions and talking about a topic much like this. So you're welcome to join there and become part of that community. And I also attempt to have a really helpful and educational blog. So check that out at unmistakably.com/blog. If you have a question and you don't see the answer on there, reach out. I'd love to know what you want to hear, and I'm happy to write a blog post about it. I thank you so much for sticking with me, for being here today. I hope that this was useful and that you have come out with some strategies that will really help you to get a handle on your budget and to plan the wedding of your dreams on the budget you can afford. Take care, be well, stay in touch, and I'll catch you later.